Morning, everyone. I'm Patrick Gaspard, the President and CEO of the Center for American Progress. Welcome to today's event. At its best, the American higher education system is the engine room for our economy and for our democracy. Our graduates build industries, advance technologies, save lives, and become teachers to the next generation. A thriving higher education system gives folks from all walks of life the opportunity to contribute and gives America its competitive edge. But unfortunately, the devastating rise in college costs, a lack of public investment, a lack of federal action, and predatory institutions have undermined this basic compact. We have an exploding affordability crisis that has left multiple generations of students dangerously exposed and subject to years of debt. 43 million borrowers now owe more than $1.6 trillion in federal debt. That's $1.6 trillion. The average graduate owes close to $30,000 in student loans, an obligation that can prove debilitating to so many of our families. That's why President Biden, in August, took the critical step of canceling $10,000 in federal student debt for borrowers making less than $125,000 and canceling up to $20,000 in federal student debt for borrowers who have received Pell Grants. This is on top of championing other efforts to improve public service loan forgiveness, provide relief for students that have been defrauded, as well as for those who are permanently disabled. All of this is with the intent of giving average Americans relief at a time when they need it most, while also restoring the promise of our higher education system. But there's so much more action that our government can take to rectify a decades-long crisis of affordability and prevent another student debt catastrophe. That includes investments in our community college system. It includes an increase in Pell Grant funding and more robust oversight to keep colleges accountable. It requires a wide-ranging, multifaceted approach, and it requires committed and bold leaders like Chairman Bobby Scott and Chair Rosa DeLauro. Both have fought tooth and nail to tackle this crisis and strengthen our education system. They've made this issue core to their life's work as chair of the House Committee on Education and Labor and as chair of the House Committee on Appropriations, respectively. Jared Bass, our Senior Director for Higher Education, will offer more of an introduction to them both. But let me just take a moment to thank them for joining us today, and more importantly, thank them for all that they've done and continue to do in this space. Our nation will advance as a more inclusive society because of their efforts. Thank you. And Jared, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jared Bass, and as Patrick said, I am the Senior Director for Higher Education at the Center for American Progress. Every year, millions of students take out student loans with the expectation that they will earn a degree from a quality institution that will lead to a good-paying job. That's the promise of the higher education system, and for generations, that promise has held true for many borrowers and their families. But for the millions of borrowers in default, the borrowers who have debt but no degree, and for those currently struggling under the weight of student debt, the promise of a college education remains unfulfilled. But we can still fulfill that promise. The president took the first step by canceling a portion of student debt, but Congress can go even further by addressing the root causes of the student debt crisis. As outlined in the recent report entitled After President Biden Cancels Debt, CAP outlines that Congress can address these root causes by increasing grant and work study aid, controlling college costs, and strengthening accountability. Which brings us to today's conversation. And it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel. Having worked for both Ms. DeLauro on the Appropriations Committee and Mr. Scott on Education and Labor, I have seen their commitment to advancing higher education reform firsthand, and I'm sure that commitment will be evident in today's conversation as well. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro represents Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District and also serves as the chair of the House Appropriations Committee and the chair of the Labor Age Appropriations Subcommittee. As chair, Congresswoman DeLauro oversees our nation's investments in key areas, including education, health, and employment. Congressman Robert C. Bobby Scott represents Virginia's 3rd Congressional District and serves as the chairman of the Committee on Education and Labor. In this capacity, he is advancing an agenda that improves equity in education, frees students from the burdens of crippling debt, and ensures workers have a safe workplace where they can earn a living wage free from discrimination. Mara Rudman is the Executive Vice President for Policy at American Progress, where she works to create smart strategies and find the path to turn ideas into action and action into results. She served as a senior official in both the Obama and Clinton administrations, and Mara will serve as our moderator for today's discussion. Mara, over to you.
Thanks, Jared, and welcome Representatives DeLauro and Scott, or I should say Chairs DeLauro and Scott, and please feel free to come on camera at this point. Great to see you both, and so honored to be able to have this conversation with you. I want to start, if I might, with a question that, full transparency, draws on my own personal background as well, which goes to the fact that while you each obviously chair a committee that influences the direction of higher education policy and funding, we don't often get to hear about your own educational experiences and how that may have contributed to the work that you're doing today. And I say this to you as someone who myself was only able to go to college and to law school because of the Pell Grants I had, because of the loans, and because of, in my case as well, the grant opportunities I had from my undergraduate and graduate school. So I know firsthand the importance of these kinds of efforts and the difference it made in my life. And I'm curious for each of you what your path was. Chair DeLauro?
Sure. No, I'm delighted to kick it off. First of all, let me just say to Patrick Gaspard, thank you for the center and for what it does and how it really informs what we do as policymakers. And to you, Mara, thank you for your leadership. You take the ideas that CAP has and you turn them into action. And that's about your leadership. I have to say, shout out to Jared. Is a senior director, higher education, but he served as he said, he served with Bobby Scott. He served with myself and really on the appropriations committee, and he is missed. And to my chair of the Education and Labor Committee, that Bobby Scott. I think I can safely say we're co-conspirators in the work that we do in these areas, and he works to bring authorizers and appropriators together. And we will continue to work on these efforts. For those of us who are in Congress, what we do, what we fight for, is inspired by our experience before we become members. And in my own case, education was and is pivotal. I'm a daughter of a garment worker. My mom toiled in the sweatshops in New Haven, sewing shirt collars and dresses, piecework for pennies on the dollar here. My dad was an insurance salesman, and I was the only one of the first generation of grandchildren who went to college. None of my cousins or so forth went to college. And it was my mom, when I used to pick her up at the sweatshop, I remember her telling me, get an education so that you don't have to do this kind of work. And so, because education is that great equalizer, it opens the doors, opportunities to jobs, higher wages, a better life. And that's what we try to work on. That's what I want to ensure, that what I do reflects and addresses the struggles of both my parents. Education today is more expensive. The opportunity is there. But it's so much more expensive. Increases in tuition outpace inflation. And college costs, as I understand it, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, increased 63% from 2006 to 2016. So you've got about 43 million borrowers. They owe more than 1.6 trillion in outstanding federal student loans. So we are at a critical juncture, as Congressman Scott knows, on the shared problems of college costs and student loan debt. But that's my experience. And as I say, it's the great equalizer. Doesn't care about your race, your education level, your gender, your political party, your religion. It's about your God-given talent. And our job is to provide opportunity to help people fulfill that God-given talent.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair DeLauro. Chairman Scott?
Thank you, Martin. I thank CAP for bringing us together and all the work that you do and making sure that we have guidance on, we can come up with ideas, but putting them together, getting the research done and making sure they make sense. That's extremely important. I want to thank you for your good work. I agree with Rosa. My family had a tradition of going to college, so for me, it wasn't a question of whether, but where. And we recognize that if you're going to move up in society, college education is the number one strategy. The people who want to move into the middle class, college is that strategy. And if you look at just Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and their family background, where would they be without a college education? And because of a college education, it opened the doors and they became presidents of the United States. Those opportunities ought to be available to everyone. And that's what President Johnson had in mind when he signed the Higher Education Act in 1965. He said, essentially, that admit that any student in any state could apply to any college or university and not be turned away because the family is poor. And in the 1960s and 70s, that's the way it was. The Pell Grant covered about 3/4 of the cost of education. It's a summer job and 15 hours a week during the school year. You could, quote, work your way through college and come out with no debt because the Pell Grant covered so much. States were putting in a significant portion of the cost of higher education. 2/3 of the cost of a state college were paid for by the state. Now it's 1/3. And there's just over the course of those generations, about 2 generations, we have transferred the burden of paying for college from the federal government and Pell Grants and state government and state aid to the student. The student doesn't have the money, so that's where the student loan problem came from. We have the same need for college, but regrettably, society has not stepped up and made it possible for people to be able to go. And so that's how we got into the problem we're in. It's not the students' fault. And the people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s enjoyed the time when you could actually go to college and because of Pell Grants and state aid, come out with no debt. Now we've saddled the debt on the students. And just incredibly, to show how reprehensible it was, the total student debt a few years ago was $1.5 trillion. We passed a tax cut for the top 1% in corporations, got 80%, was scheduled to get 80% of what was in the tax bill, $1.5 trillion. And so the accumulated burden on the students was cashed in a tax cut essentially for the wealthy. That's how we got to where we are, and that's why we need to fix it.
Thanks very much, Congressman. I want to go next exactly to the how we need to fix it, because I know you both have been leaders on that and have a number of ideas that you are turning into action. And as you know, and Jared referenced in his intro, and I will say also, Chair DeLauro, that we feel very fortunate Jared is with us, appreciating as well the big contributions he made on Capitol Hill. And Jared referenced the report that CAP put out a week or two before President Biden's decision on student debt, titled After President Biden Cancels Student Debt. And in that, as Jared mentioned, we explore how to address root causes of the student debt crisis and challenges on college affordability. You both have efforts out there. I'd be curious, Ms. DeLauro, what you see as the root causes of the student debt crisis and how the Labor H Appropriations Bill can help to address those root causes. And Mr. Scott, you recently introduced a bill that proposes changes to federal financial aid. So curious on that, how you see that bill as helping borrowers again, go beyond debt cancellation. So maybe we can start with you, Chair Scott, given your impetus to us before on the fact that we need to make these change. We need to make more legislative changes now.
Well, we introduced legislation lowering obstacles to achievement now, the Loan Act, to deal with student loans. As I indicated, we have transferred the burden to the students, and the goal is to get it off. The president took a major step with the $10,000 and $20,000 forgiveness that's already been described. That covers a lot of ground because about half the student loan balances are about $20,000 or less. So for those, that was a huge, although for people with large debts, it's just a little bit, but for a lot of people, it just cleans the slate. And so that was a major step in the right direction. The one thing it did not do is do anything for people going to college in September or people just coming out of college, because they haven't been affected at all. And what the Loan Act does is essentially three major parts. One, it doubles the Pell Grant. That would get the Pell Grant back, not quite to 3/4, but a long way back to where it used to cover a substantial portion of the cost of going to college. That would make it about $13,000 and would go a long way into relieving the need for debt. The other is the public service loan forgiveness, being able to work off your debt. We make it a little more generous by reducing the number of years. But that program would allow people to go to college and then come back and essentially work it off by working in a public service employment. And the other is essentially the major part of the last part is significantly reducing the interest rate. A lot of people are paying huge interest rates, and if they're in the income-based program, and the president made that much more generous, and that's why we would have had it in our plan, but the president, I think, dealt with that issue. If you're paying on an interest base, a lot of times you're not even covering the interest. You pay for several years, look up, you owe more than you started with. Well, that's not good. But if you significantly reduce the interest rate, your payments are going to principal and not to interest. It allows you to refinance into programs where you can get the benefits of the Loan Act. This would go a long way into making it more affordable for those with loans. It helps because the interest rate is lower. You can get a more generous public service loan forgiveness for those that already have loans. Those that are in school looking forward, the loans will be easier to pay off, so the college should be more affordable. This helps those who are in school or thinking about going to school. And that's one of the problems with the forgiveness program. It doesn't address that community.
Thanks very much. Chair DeLauro, root causes, labor H.
Yeah, no, and look, we've 43 million borrowers, $1.6 trillion in outstanding federal student loans. Clearly, you've got far too many college graduates with good paying jobs that are struggling to try to make first payments in their lives, buying a home, purchasing necessities, or pay their rent because of the debt, which is why the Biden plan, which is the extension of the student loan repayment pause through December of this year, debt relief to low and middle income families, the cancellation of nearly 90% of the debt, make the student loan system more manageable for current and future borrowers. It's income-driven repayment, if you will. That will be significant savings to low and middle income borrowers. Look, targeted student debt cancellation is going to help millions of Americans with their budget, reduce the racial wealth gap, immediately improve financial security, and it lays the foundation for moving forward. That is money that would typically go to paying off student debt, but now can be used to put back into the economy by giving these individuals much more purchasing power. You've got the chairman talked about the public service loan forgiveness program, the income-driven repayment program. Pleased with what the president did with regard to the waiver, expanding the eligibility for the public service loan forgiveness program, and thousands getting debt relief from that increased eligibility. Those programs again need to be working better, and we need debt cancellation is part of it. A reform to income-driven repayment is another part of it, and we made some changes in that area. But there really is, and I want to say, as chair of appropriations, one of the things that we've done is to earlier this year for the 2022, we have secured the largest increase in the maximum Pell Grant award in more than a decade. It is $6,985. That puts money into the pockets of students, but there is much more to do. The president has a plan to establish free community college. That is a road for us to help individuals before they might even get that 2-year degree or a credential, or they can transfer to a 4-year college. The student loan repayment has become unmanageable. Borrowers receive benefits, are not receiving the benefits they're entitled to under the current system, which is why I introduced the Affordable Loans for Any Student Act, and that is reforms to that income-driven repayment program. What we need to do is to look at how we are reforming the existing programs that are out there, like public service loan forgiveness program. I also might add that we have to hold schools accountable. We have to hold schools accountable for high costs and low quality programs that leave students with unreasonable debt. While accounting for 9% of all students enrolled in post-secondary education, predatory for-profit colleges account for 34% of all defaults. We need to crack down on these predatory for-profit colleges. They're scamming students, and they're scamming students and taxpayers out of millions of dollars here. So I'm taking a look at the role for the profit online program management companies, how they drive up the cost of graduate student debt. And I'm very troubled by the tuition sharing agreements between universities and profit companies. They create perverse incentives that drive up the costs, waste taxpayer dollars, and in fact, rip off kids. So I take this very seriously as chair of the Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee. And so as with Chairman Scott, I have a long history of working to protect students from abusive lending practices. And to that end, we had a hearing in March of 2019 about predatory for-profit colleges. Look, there needs to be, in this, I urge Senator Cardona to establish a stronger process for recouping funds from predatory colleges. The department has strengthened its process, and the Department of Education needs to finalize strong gainful employment rules for these predatory for-profit colleges. And we need to be aggressive. The Department of Education needs to be aggressive in this manner. I think we're looking at more than just one piece. I think that there are several ways in which we need to attack the problem. It's not a one size fits all, and it's not should not be siloed at one thing at a time. We ought to combine these efforts so that in fact what we are doing is taking the steps, but looking at, and the chair pointed out, requiring borrowers to pay no more than 5% of their income monthly, on undergraduate loans, cover the borrower's unpaid monthly interest, forgive loan balances after 10 years. There are a lot of pieces, but you know what's critically important? This is a focus of the administration It is the focus of Chairman Scott as chair of the Education and Labor Committee, and it's my focus as chair of Appropriations. So this is not just being left behind and we continue, without looking at legislation that can address the problem.
Thanks. I actually have two related questions, and maybe I can go to you first, Chair DeLauro, on it, since your most recent comments sparked them for me. One is where you just left off on the degree of attention that we have authorizers or appropriators playing and an executive branch playing on these issues. Anything that we should be looking at, particularly either for the lame duck or for the next Congress, in terms of whether it's oversight side of things on the accountability side or legislative focus. I know you both have outlined your legislative goals, but anything that we should zero in on for lame duck or beginning of the next Congress in terms of these reform measures and the accountability question.
Yeah, look, I'm just let me comment on the lame duck. And I don't know how Chairman Scott feels about this. We're all going to have our hands full in the lame duck period. And we have a continuing resolution that goes to December 16th. We have to pass an omnibus bill. There are 6 appropriations bills, including labor HHS, which have not been passed by the House, so that we have to package that omnibus bill. But we ought to focus in, if you will, on what is in the appropriations bill on education, because we have made many inroads there, again, in terms of where we want to go with the Pell Grant, which we view as the cornerstone. But we also are looking at, I believe that I think that the appropriations process will be pretty much take up the time of the lame duck. So I believe that some of these initiatives, like the Affordable Loans for Any Student Act, the kinds of legislation that Chairman Scott has been speaking about, I think we have to leave that to the next Congress. But what we should do is to be prioritizing the areas that we believe we can move on and get agreement on as we move forward. To be very honest, a lot depends on, and I guess I will be political in this regard, is I believe we will hold the House of Representatives and we will pick up 2 seats in the in the Senate. And that is critically important because to go back to your first comment, I think the lack of attention over the years, and I don't tag one administration or another, but the focus now is because of a Biden administration, a Democratic administration, and Democratic chairs of Education and Labor and Appropriations with a high priority on moving forward in these areas. We lose that, I believe that we lose our ability to build on some of the efforts that are currently out there.
Thanks, Chairman Scott.
Yeah, I think Rosa's right. The focus is going to be on getting the appropriation done during the lame duck. If it's the continuing resolution goes to December 16th, I think if passed as any prologue, you can count on us waiting until the 15th to get anything done. And then you're right into the holiday season. So I think she's right. That's going to pretty well take it. But there's some things we can do from an authorizing point of view. And Rosa mentioned one, and these online courses that we're finding. If you take an online course at a college, sometimes they're branded by the college, but it may be the same online course that another that some vendor has put together and just put the college brand on it. So you think you're getting the college level product, but actually you're getting some vendor's product with the just with the name on it. Some of these are priced unreasonably, particularly in light of the fact that for an online course, if it's just a recorded course, the marginal cost for additional courses is virtually zero. They just play the recording, and they're getting a ton of cash, and they're cashing in on the student loan program. So we're looking into that. There's an ongoing oversight for the predatory for-profits. There are some good ones, but to a large extent, most of them, you do not get a value for your dollar. And trying to separate the good from the bad is a challenge, particularly when most of my colleagues have never seen a good one. So anything that whacks the whole sector must be a good bill. So they're not interested in the nuances of allowing the good ones to survive and separating the good from the bad. Continuing the borrower defense when people have been ripped off and you can prove it. The last administration didn't believe in that and didn't discharge any loans. This administration has identified a lot of students who are victims of education. Some of them are so bad that the job training, job placement people said, well, leave that off your resume, because when they see that on the resume, you're actually less likely to get the job than more likely. So they paid all this money for those courses. One other area that we're trying to get, we passed it in the House, is what we call short-term Pell. Right now, you can use a Pell Grant only use a Pell Grant for a course that leads to a college degree. If all it leads to is a good job, can't use a Pell Grant. Well, that's absurd. If it leads to a good job, you ought to be able to use the Pell Grant, but limiting that and not opening the door for people to open up a little storefront operation, deal out worthless certificates and take all the Pell money is something we don't want to get into that. So trying to fashion that in a way that doesn't that doesn't waste a lot of money is a challenge. So there are a lot of things we're going to be doing during the lame duck session from an authorizing oversight perspective. But the general focus on the lame duck will be the appropriations.
Mara, if I might, and
Please.
Chairman Scott, I think it's important to note what the administration has done. I really do. And I think that this is really not very, very well known. They invested $40 billion in the American Rescue Plan, and those funds to cover 5,000 institutions of higher education. These were emergency grants to cover colleges and universities. This is emergency financial aid to students to ensure learning continued during the pandemic. They discharged nearly $32 billion in student loan relief from the Biden administration. $13 billion for 1 million borrowers whose school misled them on job placement and expected salaries, or shuttered suddenly before they could finish their programs, as well as about almost $10 billion for 175,000 borrowers through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, $9 billion in discharges for more than 425,000 borrowers who have become permanently disabled. Now, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program waiver. It allows the borrowers to receive credit for past periods of repayment that would otherwise not qualify. Now, there's been a group of us, a bicameral group, urging the department to extend the limited PSLF waiver deadline until July of 2023. When the new regulations are set to take effect. So I don't know what the outcome of that be. And then in August, this past August, you had the administration extending the student loan repayment pause to the end of the year. So there have been steps, in addition to which it's not just the cancellation of the debt, and then we'll think about all these other things. There are a number of pieces that are coming out of the authorizing committee, out of the administration, out of appropriations at the same time to reflect on what is a crisis that we know about, and a crisis that we have jurisdiction to try to bring some alleviation to and help to solve it, so that young people, as we said before, we had the opportunity to go to school. That opportunity still exists. But I think it's tougher for youngsters today than it may be. Though my father borrowed the money, made the bank payment every month. At the end of it, when he made the last payment, I think everybody in the bank came out and cheered for him. But it is helping with today's world and making sure that that opportunity becomes real.
Thanks, and very helpful framing on the extent of what has been done and offered thus far. I want to, if I might, ask you both to zero in on the most recent decision opportunity that President Biden, the decision he made in terms of canceling student debt, and I hope that. What I would welcome it from the perspective that you have, and you both have mentioned the tremendous costs of outstanding federal student loans. Chairman Scott, I think you talked about 1.6 trillion, if my notes are correct on that. And in that context, helpful to understand what you see as putting in perspective the recent Congressional Budget Office estimate that the decision on canceling student debt would cost approximately $400 billion over 30 years. How do you see that estimate? How do you put that into perspective? Chair DeLauro, you obviously, in chairing the Appropriations Committee, you're overseeing funding for a huge range of programs across the federal government. And so helpful to understand, we certainly hear a refrain from the opponents of debt cancellation that this is a zero-sum proposition, and investing in this kind of relief costs us other investments in other areas. So just helpful to see to understand how you each look at that $400 billion figure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
go ahead, Bobby.
Well, I haven't gone into the details about it, how they came up with it. There's a lot of speculation as to how many people are actually paying their debt, and if they're assuming all of the balances due will be paid, to come up with the 400 billion without considering who's going to default, without considering who's going to benefit from public service loan forgiveness, or who's going to benefit from income-based payments with a discharge at the end. I don't know how they've calculated that, but there's no question that it's an expensive program. But the people didn't get into this situation by accident. It was because the states disinvested and the Pell Grant didn't cover as much as it should have. So the people who are complaining are those that benefited from a different system. But it does point out it's a large amount, and it points out that none of this is going to help those going to college, and helping those going to college will also be an expensive process. We're going to get back to where we were, where people can, quote, work their way through college. I mean, you could, wait tables and stuff like that in 30 or 40 years ago during the summer and during the 15 hours a week during the school year and work your way through college. You can get a 40-hour-a-week job now and not be able to afford a college education without taking out loans. To get back to where you can work your way through college will be expensive, but I think the society needs an educated workforce in higher education, not just a 4-year liberal arts degree, but other skills are important if we're going to be competitive in the future.
Thanks. And Chair DeLauro, I'm going to try to stick in a question from the audience that goes to this point as you prepare to answer, because it's, I think, on the same point. We have Michael Stratford from Politico, who has asked you specifically, do you anticipate you will need to appropriate money to the Education Department to fund its implementation of President Biden's debt relief program? And do you anticipate that student debt relief program will be a sticking point as you're negotiating over an omnibus government funding bill? So since that was so directly following from the question we raised, I thought I should stick that in.
Well, why don't in terms of that question, let me just be very, very clear. And most recently, what I tried to do in the continuing resolution was to provide funding to the Department of Education to help with the administrative costs and the overhaul of getting the relief quickly. And the Republicans said no. They said no. We couldn't include that. I tried over and over and over again, back and forth with offers, keeping that in until we finally we could not have a government shutdown, but the Republicans said flat out no. So that gives you some sense of what we are up against in terms of getting these things done. And that's, and it goes back to an earlier point, and one that the chairman made, was that no one blinked an eye when we gave the tax cut to the richest 0.1% of people in this country and to the biggest corporations. We did deficit? Hell no. Not going to be, not bothered with it. We are now talking about young people who have gone to college, that they have good paying jobs, but they can't afford to get to buy a house, to purchase a necessity, to pay the rent, or they can't get married. They can't have a family because of the debt that they hold. So it's targeted student debt cancellation helps millions of Americans better manage their budgets. It builds wealth. It reduces that racial wealth gap, and immediately improving financial security. And it lays a foundation for faster upward economic mobility for people. And as I said earlier on, money that would go to be paying off the student debt will be used to get back into the economy by giving people more purchasing power. I think it's interesting to note that National Center for Education Statistics, between 2009 and 2020, undergraduate enrollment decreased by 9%. More recent data from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center so that fewer students enrolled in undergraduate programs in the spring of 2022 than a year earlier, a decline of 4.7%. Graduate and professional student enrollment also declined by 1% from last year. Enrollment was impacted by the pandemic. We have to consider that. But some think that the numbers and the breadth of the declines indicate an underlying change. Students question whether college is the ticket to the middle class and to a good paying job. With regard to affordability, a college education today is widely perceived as unaffordable for most Americans. 77% of US adults saying a college degree would be difficult for someone like them to afford. 82% of women said a college degree would be difficult to afford, compared with 73% of men. Roughly 4 in 5 Black and Hispanic adults said college would be difficult to afford. We have an obligation and a moral responsibility to have an educated citizenry. And as the chairman said, that may be a 2-year community college. It could be 4 years. It can be technical education. It can be a place where you get credentials and internship and apprenticeships. All those things need to come to bear. The issue here is, how are we going to make, education can only be the great equalizer if it is accessible and if it's affordable.
And one thing Chair DeLauro did not mention is that there's not a peep of complaint about the millions of dollars of discharge of PPP loans.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thanks. I have many more questions of my own that I would love to be asking you, but we also have a number of questions from the audience, so I feel obligated to go to those. I may try to work in at least one last question I have for you in the course of doing that. But let me, and it's a testament to both of you that we have such an active and engaged audience as well, eager to to raise their questions. So let me follow up, I think, with both of you on this question from Frank Ballman, who says that he shares your hope and optimism on the upcoming election results, and understanding that neither of you chair the budget committee. He is curious about whether using budget reconciliation as an option to fix things in the lame duck is an option or an opportunity that you see or that you would contemplate if either chamber changes its majority.
I'm of the view that we will hold the House, and I'm going to move to get appropriations bills passed by December 16th and not engage in reconciliation. I believe that in the last go round, no one thought we would get to a resolve in getting a budget for 2022. So there may be some of the naysayers with regard to that this time, but and no one thought we would even get a continuing resolution to keep the government open. We did that, and we will move to by December 16th to make sure that we have a budget for 2023. I know there are some colleagues on the other side of the aisle that see continuing resolutions is no way to govern. And, my hope is that enough of them would join us to do that. We had 10 Republicans who joined us in the continuing resolution. I hope that people would understand that this is the way we fund government. This is the government funding package, and that we have to move on it and get it done. So I'm not contemplating nor anticipating a reconciliation bill.
I would think that if there is a reconciliation, we try to get as much in it as possible. But I think when you're focusing on getting cooperation and passing an omnibus, discussing a reconciliation process is inconsistent with that, and may end up with a government shutdown. You may get what you want in a reconciliation bill, but I doubt if you'd get a budget passed.
Thank you. Thank you both. We have a question from Thomas D. that goes to challenges with another branch of government that we have not yet discussed here today, and that is the courts. And Thomas D. asks whether, and we obviously have court cases going on now on student debt relief, if courts take action to block student debt relief, what is your sense of how or whether Congress and the administration should respond? What policy steps, if any, are available to us?
That would depend on what they say in terms of why it was improper. I've seen the memos, and President Trump took action on student loans using the same provision that President Biden used. So I think the authority is there, and whether or not you agree with the policy, that's a fair game for debate. But I think the authority is certainly there. That the courts may agree or disagree, and we'll have to let them decide. If they disagree, then we'd have to look at what they allow. If it's a constitutional basis, if you can fix it with a little statutory construction, we might be able to do that. But we'd have to deal with that in looking at the decision.
I listen, just because you disagree with a policy doesn't mean it isn't legal. I will, associate myself with Chairman Scott's remarks. The authority is there, and what, providing relief to people should never be in question.
Thank you. Thank you both. Let me go to a question from Frankie Fuller about savings accounts. I'm assuming she's talking about 529s. She asks, how useful are the savings accounts that parents can start for their children when they are small? Is there anything that can be done to encourage or inspire or incentivize parents to start more of these savings programs?
I think the savings programs now are tax preferred, which gives an advantage. and when the money is spent, it's not taxed. We have that program now, and a lot of people are taking advantage of it so that when the time comes, particularly when a family knows they're not going to get much help from Pell Grants and whatnot because their income is at a level that wouldn't entitle them to that assistance, but they know they're going to have a big bill to pay, and saving up for it, tax preferred, is one way to do it. In terms of so for a lot of families, it's a good deal, and I haven't heard much discussion about ending that program, but it's not the kind of program that should substitute for doubling the Pell Grant, reducing the interest on student loans and other things for people that did not take advantage of that.
Now, I think to follow up with what the chairman said here, we have to meet families where they are. And I think it really is a fact. Savings programs may be great, but I think people today are living paycheck to paycheck. And that's not a throwaway line. That is a reality about the economic insecurity of families all over this country. So I opt on the side of let's fix the existing programs that we have, dealing with some of the things that we have talked about, today. And I don't know how much wherewithal people have, given the economic circumstances that working families, middle-class families have today, in being able to continually put money aside. Let's fix the programs that we have.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the moderator's discretion here to get in one question I was really eager to hear about from both of you. And that is in the bigger framing on the importance of a college education. And I will, in that context, the community college, four-year college, the kinds of programs that would qualify for a Pell Grant, Chairman Scott, that you referenced. There are folks who argue that a college education is a private benefit, so it goes to individual, the obligation should be on the individuals, on individual borrowers, not taxpayers, to be on the hook for the investment. I am curious about the argument for college education as a public good. I certainly heard both of you making various comments throughout this conversation about the ways in which our country benefits from increasing accessibility to education and to higher education in multiple ways. And I would say that I've certainly seen that in what has been put in legislative form in the CHIPS and Science Act and aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act, the ways in which education, access to education accrues to the benefits of the country as a whole and the country's potential standing in the world as well. That's a benefit to all Americans. Rather than looking at it as just for what goes to the individuals. Curious on the take that you both have on the individual benefit, the public good argument for why we're doing some of these things.
I think it's both. It's obviously a tremendous advantage to an individual. A college education, someone who goes to a four-year on-campus liberal arts college comes out a different person. It's transformational. And that's good for that person, but it's also good for society to have people in society, well-educated, able to understand complex issues, contribute to the society, contribute to the public discussion, to have people who are well-educated. Now, that's not for everybody. I mean, you don't want everybody wandering around with liberal arts degrees. You'd like a plumber and a carpenter around town and a car mechanic. But the four-year on-campus liberal arts experience, I think, is transformational both for the individual and for the community. And the more people you have with that experience, I think the better for the community. But it is just one part of education. You need people who have the technical expertise. You need the technical skills, vocational skills. And a lot of those skills require education past the high school level. An auto mechanic needs training past the high school level. And a lot of times those training programs cost money. And you're not going to, so you need to make sure that everybody has access to be everything that can be. Our community colleges in Virginia, I don't know about the rest of them, have a number of programs where there's 6 weeks, 16-week programs where you can increase your earning capacity 25, 50, even 100%. But you gotta get the skill. And some of these courses cost $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 at the community college. And you've seen the reports that said the average family can't come up with $400 in an emergency. Well, if it's $1,000 tuition, it might have been $100,000. They can't afford it. You toss in a Pell Grant, and all of a sudden they're on the way. They can afford to take time off because the Pell Grant will cover some of their living expenses while they're in school. But we need all of the tracks of education, liberal arts, vocational ed, technical education. We need all of those available so people can be the best that they can be. And that's good for the community.
I think that what I said earlier is that in order for us to have a strong country, strong economically and strong in leadership in the world, that we need education is a public good. And that is something that we need to promote. And we need to have the citizenry participating in the debate and the discourse in the country. And that is what education does. Now, as has been stated, 70% of Americans do not have a 4-year liberal arts college degree. And if you can get it, that's fine. And if you can't, that doesn't mean that your dreams and your aspirations should not be met. So a public good, an economic good in terms of the strength of the country. So that, as the chairman pointed out, we have technical education, we have vocational education. I just did a ribbon cutting at an expanded Platt Technical School in my district. And I represent Sikorsky, which does a 2-year internship program for high school kids. At the end of the 2 years, they have a job, a good paying job at Sikorsky Aircraft building helicopters for this country. So, and the community colleges, for the most part, are partnering with industry to, in fact, create an academic portion and a practical portion. So it is from school to work, so that there need to be a number of the choices that are out there. And we ought to, at the government level, at the federal government, has a responsibility to help to provide that opportunity and the resources to undertake the route that youngsters will take. I think it really is about the strength of the United States, both obviously economically, but also culturally and in world leadership. To have an educated population should be one of our highest priorities. And when you deal with highest priorities, and Chairman was on the budget committee, budgets are about values and what you believe are important. That if we believe these things are important, then we will use our federal resources to prioritize education for our youngsters, for those who seek to go to a community college or an older population sometimes, and who want to get skills so that they can succeed. That's the job that we have and the one that we try to carry out every day.
Well, thank you both so much. I really cannot thank you enough for the jobs that you do every day, for all that you do for the good of our country, the good of our world, the good of our students and our education system. And really, really appreciate your spending this hour with us in this kind of conversation on this important work and these critical issues. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thanks, the center.